Hello, I'm Beth Scott, and I'm the PI of the Pelagio project. And the best way I like to show this project is by showing the amazing number of people and groups that are part of this project. Now, I think you're aware now the EcoWind program is these three large areas of interest. So in the Pelagio project, we have three large work packages. The first one is really just looking at physics effects from offshore winds. And we're doing this looking at the differences in primary production at local, regional, and shelf-wide aspects so that we can look at bottom-up and climate change effects. The second work package looks at predator-to-prey interactions, and we're very much trying to understand the availability of fish to other predators, and we're focusing a lot on planktivorous, fish. The third work package is our ecosystem level cumulative package. This is looking using Bayesian ecosystem models and putting all this information that we have on the physics, the fish, and fishing into population predictions and using tools then to assess trade-offs in policy. So we can really look at the top-down effects of wind farm and fishing. And in Pelagio, what we've completed is two very large field campaigns in 23-24, where both years we've put out two gliders. That's the speckled green and purple you can see there. We've run surveys while we're doing this with CTD casts, and then we've put in a series of moorings. And last year 3, this year 5. So thank you very much to Scottish Power and Sonodyne for that. And what we're doing is we are looking at both above and below effects, so the extraction of wind energy and also the effect of the structure. So one of the instruments we put in is a T-change that has a range of CTDs on it, where we can then look in real detail at the thermocline. But unfortunately, last year, a ship took away our kit just 3 days before we were going to pick it up. We did see then with other information, we can look at the timing of the heat wave and see that had a little bit of an effect on bottom mixing, but actually there was just a massive effect later in the fall on bottom mixing. And then again this year, there was a hit and run, and we've lost all our data there. With our gliders, though, quite a big success. Here we're showing the whole season of 2023 with chlorophyll bloom at the beginning dying away, and then that heat wave coming in later. We're also looking using satellites, and we are looking at using the ZAR, and what we can see is absolutely there's slowdown of wind behind active wind farm, the sea green here, and also we are seeing acceleration in some areas. So we have model predictions at 3 spatial scales, and there was a big modeling bit this morning, and so hopefully you saw the talks by Michaela de Dominics and Ariana Zampolo. If not, hopefully you can see them later, but that then covers a huge amount of what we're doing with our modeling. So on to work package 2, here where we're looking at the prey availability in 2 new metrics, and we're looking at the local, regional, and shelf-wide scales. And so show you a bit about then, again, back to our surveys. What you see is we had our moorings at different distances from the wind farms, and then we ran our surveys where we also do bird watching. And above, just showing for scale where the wind farm is, and the little red triangles are where our moorings have been put. And what these moorings do, the WBAT in particular has both an ADCP and an EK60 on it, and they're burst every 15 minutes so that we can see fish behavior, but we also then have CTDs and the ADCPs to give us a lot more information about the physics. And so what's been done here is we can now look at 3 different types of fish. We can use the frequencies to break them into groups of mackerel, gadoids, and cupeids. And just to give you information about the type of way we're using then all of this information together with the glider information above, then we've got times of tide, and then the acoustic signal coming through, and then some of these metrics that we're looking at, this is backscattering strength, so that we're looking at all of these things together to actually test, what is driving the changes in fish behavior. And as we figure out this physics to fish information, we of course know that the birds are targeting the fish, so we are hoping to end up then with physics straight to seabird relationships. And we have this wide database now collected of all the seabird data from the last 20 years. And we've been running things like MCMC to look at foraging areas, and we're going to move forward with that very soon. In work package 3, then, we had a very successful workshop down in London in the Ørsted's offices. Thank you very much. And we had a lot of fishing industry there, government, developers, and renewable groups coming along to look at what we were doing with our ecosystem models. So with my time, I'm just going to show one of our outputs where we've run a climate change and offshore wind scenario, a good bad scenario where we've got increases in temperature and stratification. But just in case, we don't know if it's all bad with plankton. So we've got the bad is in red, but the good years, whereas 10% more plankton is in green. And what we've done is use 25 years to look at the average change in breeding success. And what you see with 3 out of 4 of the seabird species, what you'd expect in good years, even though we've got climate change going on, this good increases in production make quite a big difference in their breeding success. But of course, razorbills always stick out, and for some reason, they are negative both ways. We've also then completed the methods to assess all of this up through natural capital and net gain. And what we've also been doing is putting uncertainty into the models. It's very important to bring that through both the physical and ecological variables. And the wonderful news is with this machine learning approach is actually bringing that uncertainty in actually gives the model a bit more information, and it seems to improve the model predictions. We're getting some of the finer scale variations more correct. And then just yesterday, we've had our paper accepted and now into marine policy. Big efforts on questioning a lot of fishermen and finding out their views about what's going on. And that's us. Thank you very much.
My name is Francis Daunt, and I'm going to talk about our project EcoWings. EcoWings stands for Ecosystem Change, Offshore Wind, Net Gain and Seabirds, and is one of the grants funded under the NERC-OEC EcoWind programme. The study area for EcoWings is the North Sea, and the project is focused on 3 research questions. First, what are the cumulative impacts of offshore wind on seabirds and the wider ecosystem? Second, how do we predict future climate change impacts on the marine ecosystem, the so-called shifting baseline that must be factored in when considering offshore wind effects? Third, can we develop effective strategic compensatory measures that deliver net gain to seabirds and the ecosystem with sufficient climate headroom? To address our first objective of estimating cumulative impacts of offshore wind, we have focused on identifying the value of different areas for foraging seabirds in UK shelf seas by mapping prey offtake by breeding seabirds. The method is based on mechanistic relationships between time budgets, energetics and prey intake, combined with breeding distributions developed by the RSPB. The model maps the distribution of prey consumed that can be used to investigate any area of interest from single developments to cumulative estimates across multiple developments. It also allows assessment of the ability of current marine protected areas to safeguard seabird prey. We are incorporating these estimates into a rapid tool called Seabird Prey Mapper for assessing cumulative impacts on seabird demography. The tool can be used for spatial planning to compare candidate sites for future offshore wind expansion or regional or national scale assessments of potential cumulative impacts. The R package will be released next month. EcoWings is also collecting new data to increase realism and in estimates of cumulative effects of offshore wind. Effects of offshore wind on seabirds operates at small spatial scales, and a key question is whether birds are directly displaced or that fish are displaced and birds are responding to those changes. We will conduct a series of surveys in 2025 and 2026 in the Fourth Tay region using an uncrewed surface vehicle and an autonomous underwater vehicle to estimate prey density right through the water column. This video shows the USV during trials. We will relate these data to bird surveys that are being conducted in the region funded by Fourth Tay wind farm developers. Using advanced statistical methods, we can then quantify the effects of offshore wind on seabirds at the prey patch scale and then weave this new process-based understanding into our CIA tool. Our second objective is to predict the shifting baseline of climate change through a series of linked models on physics and biogeochemistry, on zooplankton abundance, and on sand eel and sprat energy budgets. The outputs will feed into investigations of changes in seabird population dynamics and the whole ecosystem model StratE2E. This will ensure that we account for this shifting baseline and cumulative impact of offshore wind at large. We are using machine learning to obtain rapid results on effects of physical processes and productivity on zooplankton prey of sand eel and sprat. The models capture key relationships between zooplankton energy and community composition and changes in temperature and water mass influence. We have calculated conditions for the 2040s and the 2090s under climate projections to generate estimates of zooplankton conditions at key sand eel grounds. These models show big declines at Dogger Bank, but only minor changes at Wee Bankie in both small copepods shown on the left and large copepods shown on the right. Our final objective is to develop strategic compensatory measures. We are considering measures that act directly on the survival and productivity of seabirds, such as predator management, nest site creation, and bycatch, and those that act indirectly by benefiting prey populations, such as fisheries management and habitat restoration. Our work is considering compensatory measures for seabirds and implications for the wider ecosystem. A significant challenge with compensatory measures is the lack of empirical evidence on their effectiveness. Given this, we conducted an expert elicitation of a suite of compensatory measures and asked experts to rank them on potential effectiveness for each species, and then estimate change in survival and productivity as a result of the measure. These can now be used by regulators and practitioners to help prioritize and implement compensatory measures. A topic sheet is now available, and the full results, including all estimates, will be published in the coming weeks. We have estimated effects of compensatory measures for seabirds on the whole ecosystem using the model StratE2E, which simulates end-to-end food web dynamics with each component of the ecosystem represented. The model replicates the predicted negative impacts of offshore wind farms on seabirds and other gills, shown here as red bars, as relative negative change from the baseline. The model shows that compensatory measures can offset these negative effects. The right-hand plot shows the combined effects of offshore wind and compensation, with no difference with baseline conditions for seabirds. However, there are consequences for other components of the ecosystem. In particular, an increase in seabirds as a result of compensation results in a decrease in whales and dolphins because of competitive interactions for the same prey. However, any offsetting effects of compensatory measures on seabirds are swamped by the predicted negative effects of climate change. The third graph shows the combined effects of offshore wind, compensation, and climate change, where strong declines are seen in all predator groups. As such, any offsetting of wind farm effects via compensation is overwhelmed by the predicted negative effects of climate change. The model finds that only fisheries management of forage fish can have a substantial impact on alleviating the negative effects of climate change. The left-hand plot repeats the plot of offshore wind compensation and climate change from the previous slide, and the right-hand plot shows the benefit of fisheries management to forage fish and the suite of top predators that rely on them by partially, though not fully, returning to baseline conditions. Our next steps are to publish the CIA tool Seabird Prey Mapper and to work with stakeholders on how it can prove useful. We will also be publishing the results on the expert elicitation on compensatory measures so that practitioners can use the estimates. Outputs will follow in the spring on the climate change predictions and StratE2E scenarios of offshore wind compensation, climate change and fisheries. We look forward to discussions on how climate change and fisheries can be drawn into the discussions on offshore wind impacts and compensatory measures. Finally, we are very much looking forward to our first field campaign in the spring that will deliver novel insights on fine-scale impacts of wind farms on seabirds and prey that we believe will lead to more accurate assessments of their effects in future. I thank you very much for listening and leave you with my contact details.
Hello everyone, my name is Katrien van Landegem, and on behalf of the entire team, I'm presenting updates from the EcoWind Accelerate project. We are looking at ecological implications of accelerated seabed mobility around wind farms. First question is, the changes to seabed mobility from wind farms, are they comparatively large to natural variability, and how does that compare to climate change induced future changes? So here you see maps of sediment grain sizes that could be mobilized. It's winter versus summer, and it's monthly mean versus monthly max, and it goes up to mid and end century. So as you can see, the biggest difference is between monthly mean and monthly max, but especially in winter, there is a climate impact on seabed sediment transport capacity, and this is ecologically very relevant. So how then will the seabed mobility change from offshore wind? And how does that compare to what we've just seen from just climate? So now in the Eastern Irish Sea, we've built a much higher resolution, fully coupled telemech model. I show all the details here on the slide. And we have some extra high resolution in the model as well, where we have co-registered observations from seabirds and seabeds. Now there are a few problems to solve first. We know that sediment transport modeling is a large source of uncertainty, in particular where we have turbulence in the wake of a monopile. And the second problem is that three-dimensional modeling is ideal, but not always achievable at regional scale. And what we found from an ADCP deployed only less than 50 meters away from a monopile in the Eastern Irish Sea is that the mean flow was indeed lower in the wake, but that the stress was far larger in the wake. This is just published by Martin Austin et al. And what it really says is that if you want to calculate bed stress from wake-affected flows, the mean flow parameterization should not be used. And our next step is to make an end-user tool for everyone in the UK to estimate the bed stress and the variance of bed stress when you want to quantify it with less than ideal data. So if you don't have any DCP in the wake of a monopile. And how exactly then does the turbulence drive bed stress in the monopile wake? Well, you can see here two plots with the grain size that can be moved, the larger grain size that could be moved as bed load and even a suspended load in the wake of a monopile. And the red outline there is the boundary of where the turbulence is the dominated driving force behind such a bed stress, which actually extends to more than 25 times the monopile diameter D. Now we've put this into our new three-dimensional model setup with the turbulent kinetic energy in there, but that led to an improved two-dimensional model setup, which you can see in the middle there, using that TKE. And that really does perform better than the typical setup, which is in 2 dimensions with the mean flow in the typical kind of law of the wall method. Our next step is now to change our setting into the actual offshore environment and test our three-dimensional model, see how it performs there compared to our observations, and we will be presenting that at the next Telemet user conference, which will be at Bangor in October 2025. And what are then the consequences for benthic habitats? We first need to find out what the species habitat associations are inside and outside an offshore wind farm. So preliminary results show that the community compositions across these different substrate types inside the offshore wind farms didn't vary that much, but they did outside the offshore wind farms. We also saw that the core sediments are actually hosting more abundant species, and actually that the greatest species richness comes from substrates that are more rocky. But we have annotated over 5,000 images, and we looked at more than 150 epifaunal species within them. But we have to acknowledge that there is an imbalance in sample size, and we don't have that many images from inside the offshore wind farms. So that has implications for the reliable statistical comparisons, but we do still think this is a great data set and a really good starting point. Now, of course, we cannot forget about the marine infrastructure itself. So you can see here from 3 turbines that are about 9 years old, we looked at the fouling assemblages as we took a pivot ROV all the way down from top to bottom. And all this will now feed into a modeling effort. We're going to model the biodiversity and the ecosystem services from all these scenarios. So it's the machine learning random forest classification models that will help us understand the relationships between all these variables, but then ultimately to predict how these communities are going to respond to the future offshore wind and all the climate change scenarios. And what are then the consequences for the seabirds? We look at their movement decisions, the energy budget, and the foraging success. And very importantly, that same integrated approach. We look at the physical environment, the prey, and the seabird predators themselves. And so this is just an example of all the different variables that we are collecting in high resolution. And so we are assigning behaviors. What are seabirds doing? Where are they flying? How deep are they going? To what type of seabed are they diving to? What are they finding there? What fish is there? This is really our way of finding out what habitats are going to be profitable from a prey point of view. An interesting observation came from looking at the seabird diet with two different techniques. On the left, you see stable isotope analysis, and on the right, you see DNA metabarcoding. What we see from the stable isotope analysis is mostly low energy food, and this is really what the seabirds eat. And on the right, from the DNA analysis, you see more high energy food, and that is, of course, partly influenced by the prey that is fed to the chicks. So that leads to the hypothesis, is the higher energy food brought back for the chicks, and is the lower energy food, which costs less effort to get, eaten in situ? So how sensitive will the seabirds be to all these forecasted changes? Well, we first need to update all the data sets really and improve the environmental layers. And we're doing that with Frontward, Plagio and Poseidon with at-sea data collations and updating the MERP models. And we're also doing that together with Plagio for the GPS tracking data. You can see an example here from SHAG data. And then we'll rerun the RSPB models to do so. Now, all this will lead to sensitivity mapping. We're going to have a look at the vulnerability of seabird colonies, and that will be identified by the association with seabed habitats that they have, low availability of alternative habitats, but of course the seabeds likely to change in the future because of wind farms and the climate crisis.
Thank you for the opportunity to present Barry, one of the 4 projects funded under the recent EcoWind programme. My name is Martin Solon, and together with Christian Mazak, we are the lead PIs for this particular consortium. Our first module explicitly recognises that benthic invertebrate and fish communities, and hence ecosystem functioning, are dynamic and respond to multiple layers of constraints.
To support responsible decision making, we introduced Chart Ocean TS UK, a web platform providing public access to an integrated geospatial dataset across UK waters. The dataset comprises 337 GIS layers, sourced from 35 different providers, carefully curated by experts to enhance understanding of the interplay between offshore wind infrastructure and the marine environment. These layers span multiple themes, including anthropogenic factors like shipping and fishing, ecological aspects such as marine protected areas and benthic biodiversity, geoscience like seabed type, and mid-ocean, covering waves and tidal currents. Some layers capture a single moment in time, while others include time series data from 2000 to 2020, allowing users to track changes over time. The data is organized into 13 interactive dashboards, each focusing on a specific theme. By making this information accessible, Chart Ocean DS UK supports better marine spatial planning, environmental protection, and offshore energy development. Explore the platform today and dive into the data shaping our ocean.
Within these data, we can explore how species interact with their environment and with one another according to various short and long-term contexts, so things like seasons, climate change, and offshore wind cycles. With various field campaigns using autonomous vehicles, we're filling in any gaps in that information.
The University of Southampton will be deploying a seafloor imaging AUV called SmartE 200 to map the seafloor around different offshore wind turbines and surrounding infrastructure. The photo shows SmartE 200 on a recent deployment. It is 2 meters long and weighs 70 kilos, which means it can be deployed from small fishing vessels and other ships of opportunity. It is equipped with a high-resolution camera and laser scanner and accurate navigational sensors. The center panel shows examples of the kind of data this generates, basically millimeter resolution image mosaics overlaid onto high-resolution bathymetry from the laser. We can make out individual benthic organisms, but also the different substrate types and infrastructure and even scarring from human activity. We can also automatically process these to generate kilometer extent habitat maps, and the idea is to look at how the terrain, substrates and infrastructure influence is the distribution of benthos around offshore wind farms, and find patterns that are relevant for planning and conservation.
It's essential to underpin observations, though, with unambiguous mechanistic evidence obtained in the absence of confounding variables. Across our consortium, we have dedicated facilities in place, so we can explicitly test relevant levels of noise, of vibration, of electromagnetic fields, thermal dissipation, primarily from cables, and we can also manipulate all of these within the context of climate change, fishing, and other uses. Just to give you an example of some of the experiments we have been undertaking, here's one of our setups for investigating the effects of anthropogenic sound, and within this system we can apply continuous sound versus impulsive sound. So continuous sound to mimic that of, for example, shipping traffic, and impulsive sound to mimic construction activities such as pile driving. And what we're seeing is that the response of the organisms differ between the types of sound, with continuous broadband noise being the intermediate between the ambient condition and the impulsive sound condition. And also what we're seeing is that location matters. So the same species but from different locations respond in different ways. Here's just to show you one of our vibration rigs, which was designed by our colleagues at the University of Hull. So there's a hammer device in the middle that induces a vibration across a table, and this is calibrated with accelerometers, and you can see the individual species in cores being subjected to those vibrations, and we can control the intensity and frequency of those vibrations within this system. And here is an example of one of our climate change experiments. We're looking at some of these pressures in relation to both climate change and also human activity. So here, bottom fishing intensity. And the way we're doing that is we're bringing back intact communities from a gradient of fishing disturbance, and then maintaining them in the lab under present day versus future climate conditions, so ocean acidification and warming, and then seeing how those stressors interact with one another. In Module 3, an important aspect of our approach is that we explicitly recognise the conditional dependencies of cumulative pressures. We are using structural equation modelling and Bayesian belief network approaches that are not constrained by existing or stated model structures. Hence, our approach adopts a broader consideration of the ecological consequences of offshore wind by defining impact pathways that describe the mechanisms by which offshore wind pressures affect biodiversity and ecosystems, whilst accounting for the multiple environmental and human factors that subsequently influence these pathways. So in the previous 3 modules, we've amassed a lot of information, but how do you use that information to make decisions? Well, we're kind of putting it all together in Module 4 and our final module, and here we're developing and applying a novel integrated decision support system explicitly designed to guide policymakers dealing with offshore wind through particular policy contexts.
In Module 4, we are developing a decision support procedure based on the balance sheet approach, which is designed to guide policy makers in the context of the sustainable expansion of offshore wind energy in the UK. Our decision support procedure is made of 3 main components. The first one focuses on the strategic level and tries to understand who are the winners and losers of different development scenarios. The second one focuses on the local case study level and tries to understand detailed and specific compensation measures that might be needed. And the third component tries to include all the stakeholders' points of view and all the diverse values of stakeholders in the decision-making process. Our work in Module 4 started with developing a general model of cost-benefit analysis where we extend financial cost and benefits of offshore wind expansion with environmental cost and benefits related to the effects on ecosystem services provision. We are focusing on 4 main ecosystem services at the moment, which are carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, habitat and species maintenance, and seafood provision. We are developing valuation tools that will be integrated into the cost-benefit analysis models, and the idea is that we then are able to take these values and develop some GIS layers. The resulting socioeconomic GIS layers will be then collated with biophysical layers from the other modules and contribute to the development of a visual dashboard which will be used to inform the feasibility and sustainability of different management scenarios for offshore wind energy development in the UK. The dashboard will be also used as a tool to collate the diverse values from stakeholders about the different possible management strategies.